Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Resonant Arc Book Club. My name's Mike.
I'm Kason.
We
And
finished. Go ahead.
well, anybody listening, please feel free to join in the chat. We want this to be as much of a discussion as possible instead of just, one or both of us just kind of talking the whole time.
Sure. We're
Okay.
reading Crime and Punishment. This is a book written in the 1800s.
1860s, I think. Yeah. It's about
So it's
150 years ago.
it's an old classic. Want to give us a bit of a brief on like what this book's all about, maybe the background on the author, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Fyodor Dostoevsky. Um, I guess I don't know a ton about the man himself, like the way he was raised or anything like that, but he started out in Russia and, a few of his books, like The Underground Man and a couple others, became really, really famous. And specifically in a time where Russia was like incredibly poor. And I mean, I don't know. That continued for a long time. Russia's just a hard place to live, I suppose, and so that's why a lot of Russian authors actually became really big around the late 1800s, and like I don't know, just they had such an interesting take on life in general because Russia with the Orthodox Church was kind of becoming a little bit less religious faster than the rest of Europe was with the
Mm.
more like Catholic Church and stuff like that. And it's funny because Dostoevsky was kind of just, I don't know exactly where he would put himself religiously, but he began to, in his literature, explore philosophy in a very as serious a way as he could possibly explore it. Specifically, the internal like ideas of religion, or the absence of religion, I suppose, or the absence of moral guidance. I don't know what you want to call it, but in the absence of that, can humans kind of self-govern very well? And I don't know what his personal like conclusion is, but in terms of his writings, it's something along the lines of humans are actually really bad at this. They're very bad at making decisions, and you can kind of follow it. It's not perfectly logical, but you can kind of follow the semi-rational humanity throughout his writings. They capture the human like world in between rationality and irrationality very well, and how humans may make decisions they think are good but end up not being good. And it was obvious if they just stopped and thought about it, but they didn't. And we do that all the time. So, anyways, he kind of really contended with a lot of what Friedrich Nietzsche was putting out at the time, while not necessarily disagreeing with it, but kind of trying to apply it and finding that it was harder in practice than maybe
Uh,
some people would have thought.
so I
So
have a
is that a
couple of
good?
things. Yeah, that's good. I had a couple of things
Oh
that.
yes, LARPup. No, he did spend time in a Siberian labor camp. That's I forgot about that. That is actually true. And in fact, we'll see later on in this book, we do get to visit for some amount of time a Siberian prison, which is harsh beyond belief. And it's kind of what the Soviet Union continued to use their Siberian prison system to send away dissenters and stuff for many years after that.
Hmm. So, a couple of things got brought up. First of all, um, I am not much of a historian. Like outside of like social studies in school, I never really like read history very
Mm,
seriously.
dude, I
So I
love
was
history.
I was curious about Russia's political structure at the time he was writing
Yeah.
because
Did
it
you
didn't
research
it
that or are
doesn't.
you asking?
No, no, I'm asking you because
Yeah.
it wasn't the Soviet Union hadn't formed yet, obviously. So
No, but this is, you can see based on, the writings and understanding of the late 1800s, how Russia basically fell. I say fell. Some people are socialists and so they don't like that, but I say they fell to communism. You can see how it kind of happened because Russia, like I can't emphasize enough, Russia sucked to live in. It really, really sucked to live in. The winters are so harsh, and it I don't know. It was a really it still is in some ways. It's just a really hard place to live. But they lived under a system with the czars, right? And there were certain czars. It was family lineage basically, and it's basically a system of kings. And almost like clockwork, every other king was just a murderous dictator. And they couldn't get away from it. And finally, eventually, it went down the lines, and some czars were better than others, and some czars absolutely sucked. And the area that they had to control was so big. Russia's just so massive that in order to keep people under control, they just continually had to resort to these just ridiculous means to keep their populace, under control. And so when they fell to communism, it was basically the people revolting against the last czars, saying we're done. We're taking our future in our own hands, basically. Little did they know, of course, communism kind of screwed them up even more for a while. But chance they're willing to take. They were revolutionaries, So but the system, the harsh system in Russia did foster a lot of creativity. There's a lot of good artwork and literature and some even scientific discoveries that came out of Russia that are things that a lot of people maybe weren't looking into as much, I suppose. The Russian literature is super, super influential from this time period. Yeah. War and Peace from Tolstoy. And anyways, there's some really big authors around this time that their work is still read today, and they're from Russia.
Right. So, yeah, I was intrigued by that because it was clear that, whatever the political system of the time he's writing in, it's not communism. It was clear.
Not quite. Nope.
This was
but you can sense that collective, the feeling. I sensed it. As I was reading the book this time, I sensed it. As he's writing, no one should have to live in such abject poverty. Almost, subtext of the page, life sucks and the government doesn't help kind of thing. And that is the sentiment that led to the communist revolution. It just really was not a better system, unfortunately.
Okay, so then the other part of it was, he later on in the reading that we did, he meets his friend. I'm never going to remember the freaking Russian names.
Rumskin or something. Ah, crap. Yeah. Romanskin.
Who offers him a job opportunity to translate German scientific papers or something like that.
Yeah.
And he actually mentions German immigrants a lot. And so I
they mentioned German a lot, yeah.
If that had something to do with, you're saying there was a rivalry of sorts between Nietzsche and...
Yeah, well, Nietzsche and Marx, and of course the Russian philosophers as well. Nietzsche and Marx won, I guess. the idea of abolish all religion and become communist really took hold in Russia, but there was some tension for a long time, and a lot of the big Russian philosophers weren't initially down with that, at first. But yeah, that's actually, I didn't even realize that, but that's probably part of why there's such a big German connection within this book.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit of background on where he's coming from. So the story itself involves, again, even the main character's Russian name, I can't freaking say it. Let me open it up here on...
Yeah, you're talking about Razumikhin.
Razumikhin is the friend.
Yeah.
And then
Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov's the main guy.
Raskolnikov, right?
Yeah.
So he's completely overcome by poverty. And this sort of initially is sort of the motivating factor. I think at the beginning he's going out because he's trying to spy out essentially how easy it's going to be or what method he could use to try and kill this. What is she? She's like a pawn shop, essentially. She's...
Oh, yes. Because his landlady just sucks to deal with, and the pawn shop person never gives him what his stuff is worth, anyways.
So he goes there.
He's just a resentful person.
To check out how to scout out how he's going to try and kill her, essentially.
Yeah.
And so, for me, the book didn't really, start to hook me or get me, interested until the night that he's deciding to do this. Because...
me too, yeah.
The pacing was a little bit weird because he goes there, and like she takes I think it's a watch from him or something like that, gives
Yeah.
him money that he thinks it's worth a little more, but she's,
Yeah, she gives him 1.5 rubles. He thinks he should have gotten two, something
I
like that.
believe, if I'm not mistaken, she's a Jew, right? And so like
I
they
actually
I
don't remember that.
anyways, they make a point that she's really like frugal with her money, and like that
Yes.
she's really hard about, and she's,
And every time he talks to her, she's very nervous. Like she very she's cautious.
yeah. Anyways, they have
Yeah.
at least a little bit of, I feel like, cultural anti-Semitism that they sort of like talk about
Sure.
there, with the fact that he
Yeah.
resents. Anyways,
That was
but
common throughout all of Europe.
right.
Yeah. Still
So
is in some ways.
he goes from there into like a tavern and listens to this guy's like life story
Yeah, the
for a
drunk dude.
really long time about like all of his troubles and his daughter, and how he feels like he's a miserable failure, and he's like burnt all of the family's money on drinking, and like his daughters had to become like a prostitute basically, and like
Yeah, that was a hard part.
it just goes through this for a long time, and I was just wondering like what
They
is
do
this
come back
for?
later. You'll run into him and the girl, and you'll run into that family again later.
Okay, so he's gonna bring it back
Yeah, they
at some
come back
point.
and they actually play a kind of important part in what happens in future events.
Mhm.
But at the time, yeah, it's weird. But the one thing that keeps me interested, even during that part where it's really dry, you're just in his head a lot, and he's just like, everybody just pontificates over and over. Even when he gets that letter from his mother, he
That letter was
said
so
this is
long.
2 pages. Dude, that letter was like 6 pages. It was so long, and it's like, holy crap, you can't fit that on 2 pages. And he
Tiny
read the whole
handwriting, I
thing,
guess.
and it was just, it's like people are bearing their souls. Like everyone in this story, you're seeing their soul. You're not just seeing their superficial mask or whatever, except for the pawn lady. You're seeing like their soul. You're seeing like everything about them. And that's something Dostoevsky, I guess, is probably a weakness in his writing. But every now and then, there will be things within the story where it's like the guy will start talking and the dude will have this thought. It's almost like a random thought. And then he goes, "Oh, but I couldn't actually do that. I wouldn't actually do that, right?" But you don't know exactly what he's referring to at first, right?
Mm,
Because he's been thinking of killing this woman for a long time. Like for a
yeah,
long time. He's formulated it for a while, but he has like dreams about it, and he just like, it's like in his world, and every now and then he returns to it, right? And even as he's thinking about this and he goes to the bar and somebody mentions like killing somebody, and he's like, whoa, that's literally what I was thinking. But it's like he's been thinking this for a long
right.
time. So the odds that someone was going to say something when his mind keeps going to killing somebody over and over were
Yeah.
actually kind of high. But he took it as a sign almost. Anyways, really, really kind of weird stuff. But I became really intrigued the more that he would hint at, like, oh, but I would never actually do that. It's like, and he's talking about murder, but he doesn't actually say it. So
Hmm.
that was kind of intriguing, but it was in the midst of a lot of boring stuff. Yeah.
Well, like as Restless Oblivion is saying here, I loved his internal dialogue, him speaking to himself, thinking through all these things. It was just interesting to me, and I think this is more of I wouldn't say it's a weakness in his writing as much as it is showing like the change of the times over the last more
Yeah,
than
sure.
100 years, right? Like
Yeah.
today, I want to keep in touch with my mom. I can send text messages or call and just.
Yeah.
But when they were keeping in touch, they had to rely on these letters, and I'm sure that like
It's
they would
every couple months. Yeah. It took a
they
long
would
time.
update them on a lot of things that had happened or had been happening.
Yeah.
And so, like, long form letters like that were probably commonplace.
Yeah. I
Um,
have something to say about that letter, by the way. Do you remember at
sure.
the very end of reading that letter how the way Dostoevsky writes it is like he had kind of like a smirk. He was like smiling a little bit. Like at first he was trembling and scared to read the letter. By the time he finished the letter, he felt a little more relaxed, and he was kind of like, and he started getting up and thinking in his mind about this guy that his sister's going to marry.
Then he got all
Um,
pissed about that.
and he
Yeah.
started getting really upset. But the way Dostoevsky writes it specifically, that he had like a, I don't know. It's almost like when because of what he had done, his life lacked purpose, right? he had just kind of destroyed the purpose, or one of the threads that was holding his life together, which is, hey, at least I'm not killing anybody, right? Which is a common thing you hear a lot of people say. As long as you're not hurting anybody, it doesn't matter what you do, right? So he goes out, he breaks that tenet of humanity, right? And he comes back and he's an absolute mess, like an unbelievable mess.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, he reads the story and he kind of smiles. He reads his mom's letter. He smiles. And he's like, it's like his life has purpose now. If that makes sense. It's like, he's like, I'm going to convince her to not do this. She can't do this for me. I'm going to go save my sister's trying to save me, but I'm going to go save my sister. Right. Like he has this weird like purpose within his life. Whereas he had failed. Well, he didn't fail law school. He kind of did. He dropped out, right? Yeah, dropped out of law school.
Stopped going.
He's like educated, but like not really. He's just living like this crappy life. And all of a sudden, he has purpose again somehow.
Oh, I see what you mean. Sure.
He's like, oh, I'm gonna go, because he didn't want to go back home because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, and he was kind of a screw up. He totally ruined everything. But now all of a sudden, he has a reason to go back home now. And it's kind of like giving him purpose in life again. He kind of perks up a little. He's upset, right? He's like, oh, I'm going to beat. But that's him getting excited about something a little bit, you know?
Mm.
And he wants to
go. Are you saying that works into the theme where like having meaning or purpose changes like a person's outlook, or changes like, I'm just wondering like, whether you feel like that scene where he reads the letter, that plays into the theme somehow.
I do, because I think that one of the big contentions, that one of the big like things that Nietzsche, for example, brought up and philosophized about was the fact that humans can maybe manufacture their own purpose, right? You don't need to receive purpose from your ancestors. You don't need to have any like connections necessarily within life. You don't need religion. You don't need anything. You find your own purpose. And if there is no purpose to find, then you create one yourself. Right. Sure. And that's at least in part, and Nietzsche didn't necessarily like feel that way himself, but his writings did kind of lean that way, where it's like, well, yeah, but religion sucks. So people have to manufacture their own meaning, because without religion, meaning's actually really difficult. And so Dostoevsky's like, okay, sure. Let's see that. Let's see that. How can somebody have no like intrinsic meaning in their life and still function like a normal person? And that's at least in part where this story kind of comes from, is like, well, let's, and the sparks that you see within our character, within Raskolnikov, are like when he has purpose versus when he doesn't really have a purpose. And without like, he tries to find purposes in things. He tries to find meaning in life. And he kind of, I don't know, he kind of can't. And his idea that the only thing keeping somebody from killing someone else isn't like the way you're raised, being taught not to kill somebody, or any religious or parental guidance or morality or anything like that. It's just innate within all humans. They innately know not to do something like that, right? But it's like, well, when the going gets rough, that people do kind of still resort to that. So anyways.
So he goes, what I did like a lot about it was the way that he portrayed like the conflict of the mind all the way up through the act. Like the fact that am I really capable of this? Am I really going to do it?
This is the thing. He didn't know why that conflict existed though. And that's probably more or less the actual distinction with between Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, is that Raskolnikov knew that he shouldn't do this, but he didn't know why he shouldn't do it. And so he did it because he could not think of a reason to not do it. Like there was no reason not to do what he did. But after doing it, he was completely tormented and ruined and just like so jacked up, and he had a fever and he just couldn't think straight, and he was overthinking everything and underthinking all the important stuff and overlooking things. And it was like, but he, because he didn't have a reason not to do it, he couldn't like justify it to himself not to what, like, why shouldn't he do it? Basically, it's this really crazy thing. I thought that was very, very, very fascinating.
Yeah, and that's kind of where he remembers going into the tavern, and there's like the student guy talking with, like, I think it was a constable or some policeman or something like that,
Yeah.
about this lady, and they're all like, oh, like she's not, like, I think the student brings it up, like, why shouldn't I just kill her? Like, how would that be wrong? It'd actually be like a benefit to this like community or whatever to do this, and to take all that money she hoards and all that money that she's taking from people and like give that back to people. Is that really evil or whatever?
Right.
And of course they're talking about it in a philosophical sense. He's like, of course I would never do this, but like,
of course would it
really be wrong to do it? And the fact that he had been thinking the same thing at the time.
But then the question is, well, why wouldn't you do it? If you can't say why it's wrong, and you can somehow say why it would actually be a good thing, why wouldn't you do that? And that's kind of the contention with Nietzsche of, well, because God and hell, right? Like that's the only, like, as from what humanity has been able to discover for the past like thousands and thousands of years, that like kind of is the answer, right? But those are not provable solid answers, and so you just kind of have to go with it. And if you decide not to go with it, well, then you just lost your reason for not doing a lot of things. It's just kind of, doesn't mean you go and do them, it's just that you don't, the reasoning isn't there anymore.
So he goes and has like the little thread from under his bed that he hooks the axe into so he can keep it in his coat. He goes over to this pawn shop lady, who I'll never remember her name, her place, kills her, is looking for the items that she pawns, I guess, right? He's gonna like take them.
He thought he would find the money, but instead he just found the stuff, and he was like, I guess I'll take all this stuff then, right?
Because he was trying to take note while he was there at the beginning of like the key she uses, and like listening for like where that chest might be at.
Yeah,
all this money in it,
and he assumed it was the big key. Yeah,
and he planned this while her sister was going to be out of the house, and then the sister comes back in the middle of this, and so he like kills her too. And then like some other dudes come who want to do business with her, and they're like right outside the door, and he barely escapes. And anyways, there's kind of a sequence of terror where he feels like he's going to be caught, but then he feels safe, but then he feels he's going to be caught again, and then he goes to the police station the next day thinking that they're calling him in for this, but really they're giving him an IOU for his landlady. And then while he's there, he like faints and wakes up and is sort of like discombobulated. And they ask him, well, where were you last night at this time? He's like, oh yeah, I was out at that time. And it's like, you just freaking like made yourself a suspect by telling them you were out at town.
But he was considering confessing anyways.
Yeah.
Like that thought kept going through his mind
like
over and
almost
over. He was this close to doing it, just confessing it, because it was weighing so heavy on him. It was like destroying his life. And but he knew he couldn't confess, but he was like so close to doing it just to be over it. He didn't think that this would happen after making that choice. And the craziest thing was, like, as far as just the general story goes, he got away with it, right? Mm-hmm. But in reading it from Dostoevsky's point of view and being inside his head, it's like, did he get away with it? Like, he is absolutely torturing himself.
Right, and that's kind of where we're at, where at least where we left off in the reading, is that he is now trying to make sure he's covered up all of his tracks. So he was freaking out about the fact that the hiding place for the items wasn't very good. So he went and buried them in another location.
Under a rock.
The blood on the sock. When he was delirious, he wanted to make sure he had his sock, and everyone thought it's because he's losing his mind. But like in his mind, he's trying to like cover up all the evidence because there was blood on the sock.
Well, and that's the funny thing, was that he doesn't have another pair of socks apparently, right?
Yeah, it's his only pair.
And so he was like, whatever, I'll just put these socks back on. They got blood. No one will see it. Like, I'll put a shoe. Like, no one will see the blood or anything, right? It's just, I can wear a bloody sock. And he like goes to do it, and he like can't. He has this internal conflict about putting on a sock. Like, it's like totally messing with like every point in his life.
And then Raskolnikov, is that? No, that's the
Yeah,
main guy.
Raskolnikov. Yeah,
Who's the other one? Razumihin?
Razumihin.
Anyways, that guy comes over when he's
Razumihin.
sort of recovered from his delirium, and goes and takes his some money that his mother sent to him to buy him some new clothes
Yeah,
and sort of like get him back on his feet or whatever. And that's kind of where the reading left off, was about that range. So that's as far as we've gotten.
yeah,
But yeah, like I can see the start of this question of morality
right.
being like, is it innately, or is there an objective morality to
That's
murder?
the word, objective morality. That's what he's kind of contending with.
Is there an objective morality to murder, or
Is it just relative? Yeah,
is it relative in the sense that, well, I could give more benefit to society by killing this person, taking her money
right.
and using her money to do good instead of hoarding it the way that she does. That's where kind of the anti-Semitism came in for those characters discussing that. Like,
Right.
she's just taking from the community and she's not giving back. Essentially, she's taking all this money from people, and but she's not like benefiting anyone with that money. She's just sitting on it, hoarding it, whatever.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I can see that it's kind of running in that direction. Let's see what Restless Oblivion says here.
Yeah, go ahead and read that.
Instead of the usual not murdering as the default option, Raskolnikov has flipped. His default choice seems to be committing the murder, and since he doesn't find a good reason not to, he does it almost by default. Larpup says, yeah, it's like he is a dude who has the scaffolding of morality but not the basis. The logic is backwards in the moral sense, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So,
yeah.
So
that's basically it.
That's kind of where we left off.
Mm.
And mostly what I appreciated about it was, like, I remember when I read The Collector by John Fowles for the first time. That book's really interesting. I actually would like to read it in this club eventually, but it tells almost like the same sequence of events, not exactly the same, but pretty close, but from the two perspectives of the kidnapper and then the person who was kidnapped, the woman who was kidnapped. So he kidnaps her, but you're seeing the entire first half of the book from his perspective, his rationale behind everything, his mental and emotional pain and everything that sort of drives him. And I remember reading that and feeling even just like a small sense of sympathy for that character, right? Because I was in his mind the whole time. And then as soon as it flips and we go to the perspective of the woman who's been kidnapped, I was like completely ashamed for the rest of that, knowing like there's nothing that could possibly justify this at all. And the fact that he had, anyways, in a similar sense, the fact that this is all being told from the perspective of Raskolnikov, and you're seeing like his internal struggle about this, I think that somehow like lessens the horrific nature of like what's happening.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if I was seeing this from the perspective of, say, a detective looking into the case, or maybe even a family member of the woman who was murdered, the women who were murdered, or something like that, my perspective on him would be totally different than being put in his head and seeing that he's struggling with this concept of whether he should or not, or whether he's capable or not. And then it all kind of happens all at once, and he's horrified by it himself, and obviously has some guilt. And so, I don't know, it just builds some, I guess, like layers of complexity to it, where it's like Raskolnikov is not in the strict sense like an evil person.
Right, exactly.
But like, and that's what's so uncomfortable about it, is like,
well, I can almost see myself in his thought pattern, like in not necessarily like his conclusions or anything, but the way he reacts to things that happen. like, the way that, like, let's just say, for example, after he kills the girl, and immediately he's like he starts to panic or hyperventilate or get super hot or whatever it is. He all of a sudden he starts doing things. He starts like trying to find things like on her. He's like, oh, should I cut the string with the axe? No, I can't do that. Or he's getting blood everywhere. And like, remember, finally when he comes out and he sees that door was still technically open the entire time that he had like killed people, right? And he's like, oh my gosh, I never checked to make sure the door was shut. Anybody could have been walking by. And his first reaction is to shut the door and lock it. He just locked himself in the room with the people he just killed. He's like, no, wait. And then immediately he's like, oh, wait, why did I do that? So he opens it back up and he's like, oh, and he gets the stuff and he leaves, right? But first he tries to clean up and he's like spending minutes washing the axe and things. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? But like at the same time, and then when he gets home, he's like, he thought he was clean, right? And then he finds that, oh, there's blood here, there's blood here, there's blood on my sock, there's blood in my pocket, there's blood everywhere, and I didn't wash it off the way I thought I did. But he had overlooked it because he was just panicking in the moment. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I can see that. I can see myself like in that. Like, I've never killed somebody, but I've done things I shouldn't do. And a lot of times you just get this weird sense when you do things like that like everyone around me knows. They're just waiting. I'm just waiting. One day they're going to find out. They're just going to find out. It's going to happen. And you start overlooking, you start bringing up things with other people that you shouldn't bring up, that you shouldn't even know about or whatever. And you just kind of, because you're trying to test, or what do they know? But it's like, anyways, I just see myself in that whole process.
Well, I guess that leads into, and I mean, whether or not there's an innate sense for morality, right? Like, but again, the fact that you feel that you're wrong, leading you to make mistakes, is that a social contract you've been taught all your life, and that's the reason why you feel what you've done is wrong,
right?
Or
that would be
it really truly is,
and that's the contention here. That's the Nietzsche versus Dostoevsky thing. Is like, is it just the way you were brought up, or is there an objective morality? In which case, we don't need that crap that you were brought up with. Because it's objective, right?
Yeah. King Me Jonah says, same is true with Taxi Driver. Is
that a movie, or?
I think it's a movie. It's almost a simple matter of perspective, which can rationalize one's actions being morally right. Great character piece there as well. I'll have to look into that.
I've never heard of that, yeah.
Restless Oblivion says, what do you think about the complication of Raskolnikov's being forced to murder Ilya's sister as well? I feel like the moral argument is more straightforward without the second murder. And
that does complicate things, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps that is some of the source of Raskolnikov's conflict as well.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Like, if he had just killed, I'm guessing, Ilya, the pawn shop lady, only, which was the actual question of the dudes in the tavern that they were kind of talking about, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And he meant to do this. I remember actually he woke up late, right? Because he was supposed to be there at a certain time knowing that the sister would be gone. But he woke up at 7:30 or something. He's like, oh, shoot, like I'm freaking like behind schedule on this thing I had planned. And so he's sort of rushing to get the axe, and doesn't take from the kitchen. It's up taking it from like some dude's like shed next door or whatever.
Yeah.
But in any case, like, because he had no ill will toward the sister. And in fact, I think they spend a moment kind of talking about her a little bit, how she's like a little bit slower intellectually. He has some pity on her and in the situation she's in. Maybe she was abused by her sister to some degree, whether that's verbally or whatever. They allude to the fact that he has some sympathy for the sister, but then the fact that she walks in on this, and the fact that she's so scared and just completely paralyzed with fear that she can't even cry out, right? Like that.
Yeah. She doesn't even raise her hand. She just like kind of goes like that and just.
Yeah.
Like
it does lead to. In essence, I'm just trying to say that I agree. Like, the fact that is a added sort of like element to what happened here would certainly lead him to have more guilt, more questions about whether what he has done was wrong or right or whatever.
Yeah. I like Restless Oblivion's comment here. What?
I was just going to say, I think that, like, either way, he probably would have panicked the way that he did. But
well, he kind of already was, even before that the sister came home. Because he was fidgeting to find the keys, and like, anyways, he was just...
And he would have questioned the morality of it, but I think that the fact that she was there makes it harder to justify, no doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, what did he say?
Restless Oblivion, because Raskolnikov had completely justified the murder of Ilya to himself beforehand, even using her rumored mistreatment of her sister as one of his justifications, but then he murders her without a second thought. It's almost as if Dostoevsky is saying that all of his justifications are just BS.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, because it's like he went through an anxious time before murdering the first girl, right? He had weird, he was going through a hard time mentally. But he had kind of made that justification ahead of time. Whereas his justifications for murdering the second girl had to come after the fact. And that's kind of like, it's kind of like a similar situation.
He goes on to say, I can't remember, but I'll be interested to see if he separates the murders in his mind and feels different levels of guilt regarding the two.
I don't know about well, we'll get there. I think.
Well, I think that's an interesting concept, though, because if we are talking about whether objective morality, right? He had justified killing Ilya. That she's a freaking, like, poison in this community, and she just takes and doesn't give back, and that, like, all those things. But obviously had not made any such justification for the sister. But the fact that... So is he going to separate them and go, it was wrong for me to kill the sister, but it was okay for me to kill her? Or is he going to come to the conclusion that all of it was unjustified and evil?
Or that all of it was justified.
Or that all of it was justified.
We will find out.
Be interesting to see, like, where he's going to fall in terms of, like, what subjective morality he ends up creating for himself, right?
Right, exactly. Because in the absence of a moral system, that you're up to your own devices in terms of creating your own subjective morality. And it's going to be different from person to person. So good luck creating a society based on that.
Okay. Well, that's it for today.
That's it. Do you guys have any more, like, thoughts or questions? I like what a lot of you guys have been able to add so far. Well, a couple of you guys. Not a ton of comments here today, but any more, like, thoughts or questions or anything ahead of time before we're done?
Oh, I should probably let everyone know where we're reading up to next week.
Yeah.
Let me check it out real quick. Okay, I believe we're going to be reading all the way through part 2. So we left off on part 2, chapter 2. So reading chapter 3 of part 2 all the way up to part 3, chapter 2. So
okay, cool.
Read the remainder of part 2, which goes all the way to chapter 7. And then part 3 starts, and read chapters 1 and chapter 2 of part 3.
Okay.
Is where essentially we'll be leaving off for next week. Restless Oblivion says, can I add that this is probably the most Russian thing ever? It was a long while since he had taken vodka, and it had an effect upon him at once. Though he only drank a wine glass full.
Yeah, like one of the like a full wine glass. That is actually kind of a lot.
Vodka.
Vodka has higher alcohol content than beer, so that's funny.
Larpop says, I haven't had the book fresh in my mind, but I'm glad you guys are covering it. I can quick read some for next week. King Mijona says, is there a schedule or something for book club? Well, usually we do it Tuesday nights at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, usually Tuesdays.
So this week we delayed it by a day because of the podcast, but next week,
which also might account for why there are less people here right now.
Yeah, that's true. But next week we'll be back on Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time.
But if you're referring to a schedule of like what books we're going to be reading in the future, we kind of decide that the month before.
So so on the third week, because we do all of these within 1 month, right? So this was the first week of Crime and Punishment. Next week's the second week. On the third meeting, we will do a vote on books you guys recommend. And we switch off every month, whether Kaysen and I choose one or whether you guys choose one. So this month, Kaysen and I chose Crime and Punishment. So next month, you guys will choose. But then the next month, we'll choose again. Pot80, or Potato, that's what it is. Potato. Thank you for the donation, for the 100 bits. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Says I meant
and
to
good
jump
luck
in
getting there next week. It's kind of a thick book.
Oh, yeah.
And King Me Jonah, there isn't an easy way to find which chapters to read. You just have to listen to us tell you. So part 3, chapter 2, I think, right?
Okay, so the way that I'm basing, the way that we break up the reading assignments is that we just basically break the book down into
fourths.
4 parts, right?
Yeah.
Fourths. So 25%, 50%, 75%, 100.
Yeah.
So the way that I'm basing it is on the audio book that I've put in the book club Discord channel that you can listen to on YouTube for free. It's basically, the book is read in roughly 20 hours. So I'm breaking it down to about 5-hour chunks of the audio book per week. And
which, by the way, just so you guys know, the audiobook is free.
Yes.
It is free and available just like on YouTube. Type Crime and Punishment audiobook and you will see several different versions of it.
Could post the chapter assignment on Discord. Oh, I can definitely do that. But I talk about the chapter assignment at the end of each of these videos. So last week I told everyone read up to part 2, chapter 2, which is where we left off, and now I'm saying read up to part 3, chapter 2. Read through chapter 2, I should say. So read part 3, chapter 2, and then stop there. Stop before moving on to chapter 3. Is essentially what I'm saying. But yeah, I can put that in Discord after this. Okay, thanks everybody. We will see you again next week. Peace out.
Peace.